Akmans here, Supply Chain Dynamics, Chapter 12, Collaborative KPIs, Sysdea Gameplay 7, Supplier Trust. These are services, so that's definitely co-producing here, both supplier and buyer. And anyway, it's also a supplier-buyer relationship, so trust on both sides matter. So we also have trust in the supplier. And like the supplier, trust is a stock. It quietly grows or shrinks over time. Like the supplier, the buyer, it starts off at a reasonably high level. In fact, at a little higher level than the supplier, at a level of 8, than the buyer, at a level of 8. People at the origin were pretty optimistic about about their new customer. Like with the buyer, trust erodes over time as a result of personnel changes. And like with the buyer, trust can grow, and it can grow based on clues from the environment. Again, like with the buyer, the supplier takes multiple clues. There's a clue again on the performance, and there's a clue on the transparency in this case. Both of them are not specifically modeled here, but it takes some time for those clues to actually be implemented, and they both have an equal weight. If we look at the reason, the driver for the trust level in line with the buyer performance, we have to look first. Here we have the openness towards a supplier, which really drives the transparency up here. If we look at the performance, then a bit like in chapter 10, what the supplier does, it looks at what it expects to be getting, the forecast provided from the buyer on revenues, what it actually is getting, and that leads to a certain forecast accuracy. And when that forecast accuracy becomes less reliable, as in the case of collaborative KPIs, because the amount of revenues are shrinking, then that leads to a lower trust level in line with buyer performance. The buyer transparency starts with what we had earlier on, the openness towards the supplier, which emerged from trust up here. That then moves to up here, the change in openness, the transparency of the buyer is eroding rather rapidly until, of course, and that leads then the trust level in line with the transparency. It keeps eroding until the collaborative KPI regime is set in, because then all of a sudden we have a maximum level of transparency, because that's to a large extent what collaborative KPIs is all about. So we have two drivers of trust here, one for transparency from the buyer, and the other one for their performance in terms of forecast accuracy. And both of them lead to a quiet erosion of trust until under the collaborative KPI regime, both of them start to grow again. And that's where trust of the supplier comes in. Oh, and by the way, please remember we had the IT investments. The willingness to invest in the supplier actually then also leads to a willingness to make relationship-specific investments. See, that's never negative around here. The main problem there is, as we'll see next, is they don't have any funds to invest, although they might want to.